Hi, I'm Andi Mioc and you're watching AnewZ. Here are the headlines. Syria's opposition forces take Damascus. Moscow says Bashar al-Assad left the country to peacefully surrender power. Emmanuel Macron organizes first Volodymyr Zelensky's and Donald Trump's face-to-face after the US elections. South Korea's president survives impeachment vote after imposing martial law. Ex-defense chief arrested for his role. Thank you for tuning in. Opposition forces have taken Damascus, ending the rule of Bashar al-Assad. As the curfew was being imposed in the capital, Russian Foreign Ministry said that Assad decided to leave the post and country, giving instructions to transfer power peacefully.
Syrian rebels have declared control over the capital of Damascus. This comes after armed anti-government groups led by Hayat Tahrir al-Sham have taken over a string of cities with a goal to overthrow the Syrian president, Bashar al-Assad. Reports of Assad fleeing the country have surfaced as Damascus falls under rebel control. However, Syrian authorities have not given a comment. Flight data shows a plane taking off from Damascus airport on Sunday, at the time the capital was reported to be under rebel control, according to Flight Radar. The aircraft appeared to fly towards Syria's coastal region, which is a stronghold for Assad's Alawite sect, but later made an abrupt U-turn before disappearing off the map. The Russian Foreign Ministry says Assad left his post and the country following negotiations with other parties in the conflict and gave instructions for a peaceful transition of power. The Syrian Prime Minister, Muhammad Ghazi Jalali, says the government is ready to extend its hand to the opposition and turn its functions over to the transitional government. In 10 days, the insurgent group has made its way from the north of the country in Aleppo towards Damascus. Now, with the rebels in the capital and Assad on the run, the presidential palace has been invaded by civilians. The anti-government group also took to state media to declare their presence.
In the name of God, the most gracious, the most merciful, by the grace of God Almighty, the city of Damascus has been liberated. The tyrant Bashar al-Assad has been toppled, and all unjustly detained people have been released from the regime's prisons. The Fatah Damascus Operations Room calls upon the Mujahideen brothers and citizens to preserve all the properties of the free Syrian state. Long live a free and independent Syria for all Syrians of all sects.
Damascus becomes the fourth city to fall into the hands of the rebel group in the north. On Saturday, the group had entered the province of Homs and by Sunday declared complete control.
My dear brothers, we are living the final moments of liberating Homs by God's will. This is a historic moment that will distinguish between right and wrong. We call on our brothers, the Mujahideen, as we have called on them before, to be kind to people. For those who lay down their weapons should be made safe, and those who run away should be left to be.
Meanwhile, Syrian forces officials called on citizens not to believe the statements from the anti-government group and claims the army is in control of the situation.
The terrorist media platforms have not stopped publishing misleading videos and fake news about what is happening across Syria's geography. Our army continues to implement several operations against terrorist clusters near the countryside of Hama, Homs, and the countryside in Darragh's north. They are dealing the terrorists hundreds of deaths and injuries and destroying tens of machines and vehicles, as well as several headquarters and arms and ammunition depots.
However, the mayor of Iraqi border town, Al-Qaim, says around 2,000 Syrian soldiers have crossed over into Iraq to seek refuge from the advancing rebel groups. The fall of the Syrian government brings an end to the 50-year rule by the Assad family.
A bit later on, we're going to talk to experts about the recent developments in Syria and the reactions from the region. But meanwhile, in other news, world leaders gathered in Paris ahead of Notre Dame's reopening witnessed a significant trilateral meeting as U.S. President-elect Donald Trump, French President Emmanuel Macron, and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky held discussions on Ukraine's future amidst the ongoing war.
In Paris, at the Élysée Palace, U.S. President-elect Donald Trump joined French President Emmanuel Macron and Ukraine President Volodymyr Zelensky for a brief, impactful meeting. The talks, lasting around 30 minutes, took place just before the grand reopening ceremony of Notre Dame Cathedral 5 years after the devastating fire. The focus of the meeting was clear: the war in Ukraine.
It was a very good meeting. It was constructive. The mood was important. The fact that we talked about Ukraine, only about Ukraine and the Ukrainian people and how to support them, about how strong Ukrainians are, how resilient to have withstood all this invasion, the Russian aggression. We all want peace for us, and this is our position. We want the peace to be just for us, and that Russia, Putin, or any other aggressor would have no opportunity to come back in the future. This is what's most important: just peace and security guarantees, strong security guarantees for Ukraine. We have agreed to continue working.
While the details remain undisclosed, Ukrainian leader described the discussions as good and productive, emphasizing the shared commitment to peace and the need for strong security guarantees for Ukraine. Concerns remain over Donald Trump's stance on U.S. military aid to Ukraine. European leaders, including Emmanuel Macron, are seeking reassurances about continued support for Kyiv. Donald Trump, who takes office next month, has advocated for a negotiated settlement and called on European nations to shoulder more defensive responsibilities. The meeting offered the French leader an early opportunity to mediate between Europe and the incoming U.S. administration. Following the talks, the leaders headed to Notre Dame Cathedral, where dignitaries gave Volodymyr Zelensky a standing ovation upon his arrival. The Trilateral talks in Paris may set the tone for future international collaboration with Ukraine as the world closely watches the evolving dynamics of the U.S. foreign policy.
Just earlier, the United States unveiled a $988 million aid package of new arms and equipment to Ukraine for its ongoing fight against Russia's invasion. U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin announced the package will include more drones and munitions for the high-mobility artillery rocket systems, or HIMARS, that the U.S. has provided. Latest aid package brings the total of U.S. security assistance committed to Ukraine since February 2022 to more than $62 billion. Austin said that the incoming administration of President-elect Donald Trump must make its own choice on whether to confront Russia. Trump, who takes office in January, has been critical of large-scale support for Ukraine.
We can continue to stand up to the Kremlin, or we can let Putin have his way and condemn our children and grandchildren to live in a world of chaos and conflict.
Over in Georgia, thousands of pro-EU protesters gathered yesterday for the 10th night of standoff between the government and the opposition. The country of 3.7 million has been gripped by crisis since the Georgian Dream Party, who returned to power in an October election, which the opposition says was tainted by fraud, said it was halting European Union accession talks until 2028. The ruling Georgian Dream Party says the protests represent an attempt to stage a violent revolution by pro-EU opposition parties. The opposition accuses the current government of becoming increasingly authoritarian and pro-Russian, which it denies. South Korea's political crisis deepened as the former defense minister was arrested over last week's martial law declaration. Kim Jong-hyun was detained on Sunday for his role in imposing martial law, which sent troops to encircle parliament. The declaration was overturned within hours, but it has left the nation reeling. Prosecutors have launched a large-scale investigation, while the president survived the impeachment vote in the parliament. Over in Ghana, main opposition party candidate and former President John Dramani Mahama is celebrating an election victory. Day after the presidential and parliamentary election concluded, his main rival and vice president of the country, Mahamudu Bawumia, conceded defeat. The final results of the votes will be known Tuesday. Voters expressed optimism over the turnout, hoping for an economic upturn after a financial crisis in Ghana.
Previous election was somehow shaking, and then there was a lot of, let me say, inconveniences. But this time we want it to be smoother than the previous election, so that everything will be clear.
I'm very, very, very happy because of John have winning Bole district or Bole municipality. So today I'm very, very happy. All of the town, young boys, youth, ladies, old men, all of them.
Darragh touched down in Northern Ireland, Wales and the west coast of England, leading to roadblocks due to fallen trees, power cuts and flight delays.
Storm Darragh brought high winds and severe weather to Britain's west coast. Wind speeds reached around 90 miles per hour, which led to power cuts. Various flights, including both international and domestic, were cancelled from Northern Ireland. On Blackpool's famous waterfront, wind carried sand swept along the promenade past Blackpool Tower. A rare red weather warning has been issued for landscapes of the UK, and many residents have received government messages warning them to be cautious when traveling. Wind will subside, the Met Office said, but Darragh is not done yet. A yellow warning is in place across England and Wales, and Woodbine residents, along with others, have been warned that power, which people did not have for quite some time now, is unlikely to return soon.
United States authorities have identified the man suspected of killing UnitedHealth Chief Executive Officer Brian Thompson and are closing in on him. The New York Police Department is withholding the suspect's name for now. Thompson was gunned down in what police say was a targeted attack. UnitedHealth is one of the biggest health insurers in the United States. The company has been dealing with a significant data breach, which has disrupted patient services and delayed payments to providers. The NYPD has offered a $10,000 reward for information leading to the capture of the shooter, and the Federal Bureau of Investigations has added $50,000 to that reward. 1 century, 3 deportations. One of the gravest outcomes of the territorial conflict between Armenia and Azerbaijan has been the mass deportation of the Azerbaijani population. In the 20th century, Azerbaijani communities were forcibly displaced from Armenia 3 times, leaving a lasting impact on the region.
Currently, over 120 million people worldwide face forced displacement, an issue demanding global cooperation. Azerbaijanis have endured this reality for over a century, with multiple waves of deportations from Western Azerbaijan, now part of modern Armenia. Between 1918, 1921, 1948, 1953, and 1987-1991, hundreds of thousands were displaced, resulting in Armenia becoming a mono-ethnic state devoid of Azerbaijani communities.
So the United States, since the 90s, has stood with the idea that people who've been displaced in a mass deportation due to war have the right to return within the political framework that is established to establish peace. And so we still stand on that.
International law condemns forced displacement and ethnic cleansing, requiring measures for their prevention and redress. The 1951 UN Refugee Convention and the 1967 Protocol guarantee refugees the right to return safely. Despite this, Azerbaijanis displaced from Western Azerbaijan still await the conditions necessary for their return. Armenia's failure to ensure these conditions is central to Azerbaijan's ongoing legal claims in international tribunals.
You have to tell the international community it is a just cause. It is not just a political cause, it's a human rights dimension cause. And I'm pretty sure if this is explained to the international community correctly, the video this morning is a wonderful example. Avim and the Air Center only a couple of days published a new research paper about why are there no Azerbaijanis living in modern Armenia. And this actually has to be transported to the international community, not just to one country, to 2 countries, United Nations, what have you, UNESCO, human rights associations, and then ultimately I think it will work.
Armenia's policies have also resulted in the destruction of historical, religious and cultural heritage in Western Azerbaijan. This damage is a violation of international law and has erased centuries of cultural legacy. International organizations, especially UNESCO, are urged to take action to preserve what remains and sanction Armenia.
I mean, and this is an obligation of Armenians that they must assume to protect also this cultural heritage of Azerbaijan there. And of course, the international community must play there also a role, especially international specialized organizations such as the UNESCO, but also other actors, for instance, the European Union. I think that they can play an important role to reestablish this cultural heritage.
As concerns legal remedies at the moment, as I said in my presentation, the right to return is not a collective right, so it's not applied to a whole community of people. It is more individual, because when we talk about whole communities, normally it is a political or a self-determination problem. So I think that before going before a court, dialogue and cooperation and diplomacy should be promoted to try to reach an agreement, since both countries have the same interests and the same condition.
Forcible displacement is not just a regional problem, but a global concern. International law, including the 1948 Convention on the Prohibition of Ethnic Cleansing, places obligations on Armenia to ensure the return of displaced Azerbaijanis and to safeguard their cultural and national heritage. The resolution of this issue is essential for peace and justice in the region.
They would like to go their home with security, you see, their desire, but that is the important. Do you follow me? So we believe that this effort will be end as soon as possible, because there is a peace agreement nowadays between Azerbaijan and Armenia.
The international community must act to resolve the issue of displaced Azerbaijanis. Organizations such as the UN and UNESCO must take decisive steps to enforce the safe return of displaced communities. This is not only a legal obligation but a humanitarian imperative, vital for lasting peace in the region.
We return now to the top story of the day: rebel forces seizing Damascus and ending Bashar al-Assad's rule in Syria. On the latest developments, reactions in the region, and what could come in Syria's closer future, we're talking with Ahmet Arda Shensoy, a political researcher in Nottingham, and Kamal Al-Shami, a political analyst based in Beirut. Ahmet, Kamal, welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Hello, thank you for having us, yes.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you. For starters, Ahmet, the reports Assad fled the country seem to be confirmed by Moscow, who now says Assad left the country and gave instructions on a peaceful transfer of power. How do you see the developing situation in Syria?
First of all, I think it was obvious for experts on Syrian civil war. When we closely monitoring the civil war recently, we saw that in a local sense, we sensed that there are some clash between the regime and the opposition forces, especially on the west of the Aleppo and the Idlib. And we knew that the Assad regime was the weakest local actor in the war. But with Russian air power, with Iran-backed militias and the presence of Hezbollah had prevented to see that. After they are busy for other important geopolitical issues right now, they had to left Assad alone. So that's why we saw a sudden and quick dismantle of the 54 years long Assad regime right now. And while armed opposition groups engaged in a long struggle, the regime refused to resolve the conflict through diplomacy and the peaceful means in so many times. And despite international pressures, including the regional actors, and in the recent one was the Ankara and Damascus process was the main issue in the last month. But we saw that the Bashar Assad did not give a positive response to President Erdogan, and that was unfortunate for him in that regard. But with his and his father's brutal regime for almost 55 years. I do not think that anyone will be sorry for him. I think that that's the main issue right now.
Kamal, in neighboring Lebanon, that is hosting a great many of refugees from Syria, there have been celebrations in the street. How do people react? What's happening on the ground? Also, were there any political reactions?
Well, Andy, and even though Lebanon is a very small country, it's very ethnically and culturally diverse, and each and every single faction from Lebanon has been affected, whether for good or for worse, by the Syrian government, or the ex-Syrian government, should I say. I'd say the vast majority of Lebanese factions over here are rather celebratory. They're actually happy. They're optimistic of the future that awaits Lebanon, especially now since there's there are certain factions that might or may not be weakened inside of Lebanon. So the vast majority of factions, meaning from the Maronite Christian majority, from the Druze majority, and from the Sunni majority, are optimistic. However, there is the other faction, which is the Shiite majority of Lebanon, which has been rather quiet up until now. You can you can say one thing for sure is that no one is backing al-Assad from the Lebanese side at all anymore. I think everyone has looked at it and everyone is seeing that it's a losing cause today, and they should start building relations with the newer government that will be formed. Even when certain proxies inside the country were expected to interfere, they refrained from interfering. You can see Russia building relations with the rebels, actually communicating with them for coordinations. So I think everyone in Lebanon and outside of Lebanon has understood there's no more speaking with the previous government. It's now time to speak with the newer government. It's now time to build relations with the new people in charge. Over here, we've been witnessing tons and tons of marches, of happy marches. Unfortunately, there have been some gunfire sounds in the distance. Lots of fireworks as well. Lots of motorcycle and vehicleized marches. For Syrian refugees and for people announcing their happiness. Political leaders of the many political factions in Lebanon have been rather vocal about it. Some have taunted the Assad regime, the government. Others have simply commented on it, saying it's fallen. Now it's time for us to look for the future. But the general view on the case is that there's optimism to be looked at.
The Prime Minister and the rebel forces leader have given out messages that are promising for the near future, with one saying the government will cooperate with anyone who the Syrian people choose, and the other instructing fighters to protect public institutions. Ahmed, what do you make of that?
First of all, like the other guest said, we can see that the allies of the Assad regime has left to back him. So that, and in that way, they try to have a channel with the new opposition groups, or maybe we can say will be formed a transition government. They try to have a role in there, or they try to have a clear diplomatic connections in there in order to gain in some influence in the newly formed regime or the government in the Damascus. So, by the way, we can say that from the Turkish side or the Turkish perspective, Turkey is closely monitoring the situation, not only for the Damascus and especially for the counterterrorism as well. And after President Erdogan's supportive comments on Friday, Turkish position came clear. Before that, it was very unclear, we can say that. And Foreign Minister today, he said Turkey was ready to help the transition process in Syria, and he warned against instability in the country. And especially, he also mentioned that regional actors and others should be calm and cautious, and the region should not be driven into more instability. So he means that Turkey don't want any country to intervene Syria right now. Maybe you can say Israel, Gulf countries, Arab countries, Iran, or the US. So Turkey do not want them in the conflict environment right now, and keep it that the local way. So that's the Turkey's role and stance. We can say that right now.
Kamal, looking at things from Lebanon, would you say that there are vulnerabilities now that other forces or groups in the region might take advantage of?
Sorry, can you elaborate?
Yes, of course, other groups, other foreign countries, different backed groups. Do you see maybe a chance of an extremist group or a terrorist group making trouble in Syria now?
Yeah, I understand. Well, there's always the fear of that happening. Absolutely. Lots of people have been saying that we don't want what happened in Libya to happen again in Syria. But there's one thing to look at. What happened in Libya has already happened in Syria. There have been multiple factions, each faction having its own geographical slate of the Syrian map, ruling over it, maybe even making its own currencies in some cases. So the foreign factions have already been interfering. But I think what happened in Syria recently with HTS moving towards Aleppo and then etc., and then FSA moving towards Damascus, and then both of them meeting in Damascus, I think what happened was each side wasn't looking. Russia was very busy with Ukraine. Iran was very busy with what just happened on the Lebanese front from southern Lebanon. None of the Syrian government, the Assad government allies, could take care of what was going on. None of them could help him. So what happened by the rebels was that they took advantage of the case. Now, as for foreign intervention, I think what U.S. President-elect Donald Trump said recently on Twitter, I think, or X, was rather clear to everyone. They don't want to interfere. Maybe Western influence has already been interfering with it in a light way, but as for direct interference, I don't think that's going to happen from either Russia, China, or the US. When we're talking about the southern side of Israel, though, we can talk about Israel, and they have been rather vocal about it. They have been rather honest about it. We don't want problems at our border, at the Israeli border, that is, which is why we can expect military action, kind of creating like a buffer zone on the border, furthermore from the Golan Heights. Maybe even some can say that Israel want to move towards the Lebanese border with Syria to create a buffer zone from Hezbollah as well, and create a pressure plate on it. But that remains to be seen, really.
Gentlemen, thank you so much for speaking to AnewZ and sharing your insights. In other news, over in Stockholm, Nobel Prize winners have expressed concerns over the future of artificial intelligence, highlighting both its potential and risks. They stressed the need for better regulation as artificial intelligence rapidly advances.
At a press conference before the Nobel Prize ceremony, the laureates discussed AI's rapid development and its societal impact, calling for better regulation. Nobel Physics laureate Geoffrey Hinton, known as the godfather of AI, warned that AI could achieve superintelligence within 20 years, sooner than expected. He also raised concerns about the lack of regulation for AI in military applications, especially autonomous weapons.
One of the shorter-term dangers of AI is the development of lethal autonomous weapons, and there isn't going to be any regulation there. If you look at the European regulations, for example, they have a specific clause in them that says none of these regulations apply to military uses of AI. So governments are unwilling to regulate themselves when it comes to lethal autonomous weapons.
Nobel Chemistry laureate Demis Hassabis, known for using AI to predict protein structures, shared similar concerns. He highlighted AI's potential to address major global challenges like disease and climate change, but emphasized the importance of keeping regulations ahead of the technology's rapid growth.
AI is very important technology to regulate, but I think it's very important that we get the regulations right. And I think that's the hard thing at the moment, is it's such a fast-moving technology. and evolving so quickly, what we would have discussed regulating a few years ago is not what we would be thinking about regulating now. So what I've been advising governments and civil society to do is to have fast and nimble regulations, maybe build on the regulations in domains that we already have regulations in, like healthcare and transport and so on, and see how the technology develops and then quickly adapt to the way that's going.
Nobel Economic Sciences laureate Darragh raised concerns that AI could worsen global inequality. He warned that AI's control is concentrated in the hands of a few, which could make the gap between rich and poor nations even wider.
Today, there are really staggering differences between countries. In this hyper-connected, globalized world, some of the richest countries are 60, 70 times as rich per capita as some of the poorest countries. Look at before the Industrial Revolution, those gaps were perhaps 3 or 4-fold. Disruptive technological changes or disruptive events often have the effect of creating new divergences. Industrial Revolution was definitely one, world wars. And I think AI promises to be a disruptive one for good and bad. So there is a danger that it will actually widen a lot of gaps. But I do remain very worried that that's not the direction we're going. And the way in which AI is concentrated in the hands of a very, 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 very small number of people in an extremely oligarchic, oligopolistic setting and in the hands of a very few countries is going to be a further impetus to much greater inequalities.
As AI develops quickly, the Nobel laureates urge that society must act to manage its risks, ensure its benefits, and use it for the greater good.
Lastly, in space news, the crew of China's Shenzhou 19 has been on the Tiangong station for over a month, conducting experiments and doing maintenance work. They are set to hold 86 experiments, with some of them aiming to help humans explore deep space.
China's Shenzhou 19 crew members have completed various tasks during their over 1 month stay aboard the orbiting Tiangong space station. 3 crew members currently on a 6-month mission are set to conduct 86 space science research and technology experiments while also performing maintenance work on the station. One of the experiments is on the biological effect and molecular mechanisms of fruit flies under a weak magnetic field in space. They are also looking into the way stem cells undergo 3-dimensional growth and tissue construction in the microgravity environment in space. In the field of space medicine, the crew members are researching the influence of gravity environments on the sensitivity of human visual biological motion perception and how weightlessness changes these perceptual sensitivities. This research aims to provide a scientific basis for human exploration in deep space and adaptation to diverse gravity environments in the future.
That's all we have for you for now. Thank you for tuning in and keep watching AnewZ.